I will now explore the risks posed by flood, some of the key principles of flood risks as well as flood risk management. Flood risk is a function of exposure, the hazard itself, and vulnerability. Exposure is, for example, the elements at risk. What exists, for example, on the floodplain. Elements at risk might be infrastructure, it may include economy, it might be health facility. It may include people, households, businesses, public building, cultural assets. It may even include the natural environment, the ecological system. These can be estimated and a monetary value assigned, and as such, the level of risk estimated or quantified. Wherever there are elements at risk which are highly vulnerable to a particular hazard, especially a high magnitude flood event, this may result in flood risk and ultimately a disaster. As such, flood risk management is essential in the UK. The hazard itself is the natural phenomenon. It's a type of flood. It is the duration, it's the magnitude, frequency, and depth of flood water. But as highlighted before, that intensity, frequency, duration is now increasingly influenced by climate change. As such, the protective standards to prevent floods needs to be improved. Vulnerability is a characteristic determined by physical, social, economic, and environmental factors or processes which increase the susceptibility of an individual, a community, asset, or system to the impact of hazards. Vulnerability itself is expressed as an expected annual damage. But what determines vulnerability? Vulnerability is determined by historical, political, cultural, as well as institutional processes. These shape the social and environmental condition people find themselves in. Vulnerability can be physical, living in high-risk area, for example, moving onto floodplain. Vulnerability also, for example, in poor housing structure which are not water compatible. It can be social, for example, poverty, literacy rate, attitude, awareness, community participation. It might be economic, business, diversification, small business, accessibility. It could be environmental, for example, area that's sensitive to changes, degraded land. Vulnerability is also about political will or political tension. Where there's, for example, political will to enact regulations to manage flood risk, then that's likely to reduce level of vulnerability. If we understand vulnerability, we can significantly put in place management strategies to reduce risk. Vulnerability as a component of risk plays the most significant part. Overall, flood risk is the probability of a loss, and this depends, as I mentioned before, on the hazard, vulnerability, as well as exposure. If any of these three elements in risk increase or decrease, then the risk decreases and increases. As such, in flood risk management, it's important to manage each separately as well as together. Hazard can be reduced by management features, which I will discuss later on, but certainly vulnerability is the factor as well as exposure which we've got most control over and which we can effectively manage in order to reduce flood risk. Risk can also be viewed as being related between consequence as well as likelihood of a flood event. Likelihood, it could be rare, unlikely, possible, almost certain. Consequences is, for example, what the impact will be. Is it going to be insignificant, minor, moderate, major, or catastrophic? The combination of likelihood and consequence leads to risk. So where an event is almost certain and the consequence is major or catastrophic, therefore that will be deemed as critical risk. Where the likelihood of an event is rare and the consequence is minor, that will be deemed as low risk. Another example is where the likelihood of that event is quite possible, the consequence is moderate or major, this would be high risk. So risk could be viewed in different ways, as I mentioned before, looking at those three components of vulnerability, hazard, exposure, but you could also look at risk in terms of that combination of likelihood and consequences. By understanding risk, we are then able to manage that risk in a number of ways.